420 somewhere, and right now that somewhere is right here. So hello and welcome to a very special 2016 election wrap episode of The Cannabis Show. My name's producer Vince, and here's your host, Ricardo Baca.
Very special, Vince. So special, and to everyone joining us today, welcome to The Cannabist Show, where we talk about all things weed.
Hashtag all things weed.
That is the serious marijuana news and the fun stuff as well. In fact, if you pop onto The Cannabist right now, you can read stories about the election.
What?
Yes, still so many stories about the most important cannabis election we've ever known.
We're having trouble getting them all out and out of our mouths.
We've got a new piece by Cannabist columnist Eugene Monroe, who used to play for the Baltimore Ravens.
NFL and weed, will they ever mix?
And that's exactly the subject of his column, Vince. And also, what's exactly happening with that social marijuana use initiative in Denver?
We are on our toes with that one.
Oh, the election is over. Producer Vince, how you doing?
You know, it's Wednesday. I'm focusing on that right now, Ricardo. I'm doing really well. I had a really nice conversation on the rooftop of my building last night overlooking the Denver skyline, smoking a couple of really good joints and just kind of reflecting back on the day that was, and I'm feeling good about life right now. Ricardo, how are you doing?
You know, I think you were up a little bit later than I was. I think I called it a night at 1:30 and just collapsed into bed. And yeah, you know, I think I was so just like enwrapped with cannabis measures and votes all night that I could kind of hear other things happening, and then I just kind of
You and
got
the cannabis
absorbed.
crew killed it last night. I had no trouble following anything that was going on around the country.
Well, thanks, man. Yeah, it was a good night. It was a great night. Lots of interaction with our readers, our viewers, listeners. A big night. You know, but I'm pleased to be here, this very special episode of The Cannabist Show. We have some great guests, but before we jump into that, I do want to note that our show today is underwritten by Bluebird Botanicals, and Bluebird Botanicals is a company that creates hemp-derived CBD oil and other herbal supplements, and they sell them worldwide, so be sure to check them out at bluebirdbotanicals.com.
Sponsor.
There you go. And Vince, I think it's time, so why don't we just jump right into the week in weed?
I'm extra motivated now that somebody's paying me to jump into this week in weed. Finally, let's do it, Ricardo. Let's get into it.
All right, but since this is an election wrap special, and I'm super excited to get to our guests in here, we will keep this brief and to the point. So we are starting this week in weed in Pueblo, Colorado, a city that sits about 2 hours south of our Denver studios right here, and that is where activists are celebrating some big election wins this week with a bold surprise announcement.
Yeah, the election wins centered on a citizen-proposed ban on all recreational marijuana businesses in Pueblo City and Pueblo County, measures that, if passed, would have shuttered retail marijuana businesses there within a year. But instead of passing, both attempts failed. So, weed lives on in Pueblo.
Weed lives on, and the activists running the No on 200 campaign in Pueblo celebrated the wins with the announcement that they are beginning to plan what they hope will become the National Marijuana Museum located in Pueblo, Colorado.
Wow, and what's really interesting is the initiative is part industry and part non-cannabis community. And the person helming the museum steering committee is a veteran home builder who is the current chairman of the board for the Colorado Association of Home Builders.
You know, elsewhere in the Week in Weed, we are looking to introduce you, we are very happy to introduce you to Other Roots. And that's a new feature we have here on The Cannabist. In Other Roots, we're going to share the stories of the underrepresented individuals in and around the marijuana movement. I'm thinking women, ethnic minorities, and others whose voices aren't as prevalent in the conversations surrounding legalization as others.
Giving a voice to those people is very important, and our first Other Roots subject is Norton Arbelez, who founded River Rock Cannabis right here in Colorado and some other shops in very newly legal Massachusetts. If you know someone in or around the marijuana industry who you think would make for a compelling Other Roots profile, please let me know. At Vinny Chant. I'm so excited to start exploring these.
Yeah, check out the first one. We have a couple more on deck I'm really excited about. But elsewhere in the Week in Weed, I'm turning things back on you all. and giving each and every one of you a big thank you and a high five, because for the second month in a row, the Cannabist beat out High Times and digital traffic, and we are so very psyched about it.
Cue the canned applause, because yes, more than 800,000 unique visitors visit us at thecannabist.co in September, while High Times drew 720,000. And views for this very show and listens to this podcast for you with your earbuds in are also steadily picking up. So please tell your coworkers, your parents, your siblings, your friends, the dude at the Starbucks, everybody, all about us.
Especially your parents. Please tell your parents. My mom listens to the show. Your mom should listen to the show too.
She'll love it.
Finally, here is our colleague Alicia Wallace with this week's Quick Hit.
Traditional big business isn't big on marijuana just yet, but some of the major players on Wall Street are keeping a close watch. Alcohol companies, think Jack Daniels, think Sam Adams, and pharmaceutical businesses are a little nervous about marijuana's impact on their bottom lines, while others, like breathalyzer makers and behavioral health firms, see opportunity in a new market. Some of these fears and hopes have been disclosed in filings that public companies are required to make with the SEC. I delved through the filings and found that the very mention of marijuana or cannabis has risen dramatically in recent years. Legal cannabis is considered a risk factor by some, is welcomed by others, and is creating unique headaches for those that handle cash, like ATM makers and casinos. For The Cannabist, I'm Alicia Wallace with this week's Quick Hit.
All right, thank you, Alicia. Now it is time to bring out our first guest and our second guest. You know, we've actually never done this before, but because we usually want to spend time alone with each guest. But since this is a very special 2016 election wrap episode of the Cannabist Show, and because we have a lot to discuss, I'm bringing them out at the same time. So please help me in welcoming Taylor West from the National Cannabis Industry Association and Brian Vicente from the marijuana law firm Vicente Sederberg. Hey! Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Hey, man.
Thanks, buddy.
Good to see you.
Absolutely.
When you texted earlier to let me know that you were here, I realized that we first exchanged numbers when we were in New York at that John Jay Criminal Justice Symposium at the John Jay School.
There you go. Good times.
Which was it feels like a long time ago.
It was. Many things have happened since then.
A couple things, you think? And we're going to talk about some of those. But first, you guys, indica or sativa, where are you at on the spectrum? Brian, we're starting with you.
Hybrid.
You're a hybrid man.
I'm a hybrid man.
Oh, yeah. Lucky you. I think most strains are hybrids these days, right? Yeah. But you
so
just
that's like saying all.
I used to be exclusively indica, but then I realized after at night after I clean up after my kids and start doing the dishes, sativa is really nice. So I kind of just blend the two.
I like it. Nice. And Taylor?
You know, I tend to use it as much for sleep as anything else, so indicas is the direction I tend to go.
Oh, word. Okay. And you were telling me right before the show that I've never asked you that question before, which is crazy because viewers, Taylor West right here is our very first guest to reach the 3-episode milestone. So, brava.
Very proud of myself.
Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. You're the first ever. We're going to have you sign something special on the wall. Maybe I'll, pull my shirt over.
There you go. I like it. I like that plan.
You guys, serious stuff to discuss, a lot of ground to cover. We're going to jump right in, but we're going to ease into it. So, Prop 64 passed last night in California. How big of a deal is that, Taylor?
It's a huge deal. This is the 6th largest economy in the world, as I think we've heard a lot of times at this point. It is a huge part of the legal marijuana market in the U.S. right now, and it's going to get substantially bigger now that it's opened up to adult use. On top of that, it also means a lot in terms of congressional representation. Because California is so large from a population standpoint, there are a lot of members of Congress who represent districts in California. Now that they have this full adult use legalization, the issues that we deal with at the federal level are going to be that much more important to them. Sure.
And, I think something that we've written about, something that other people have clearly been writing a lot about lately in this conversation, Brian, I'm curious if you agree, is California the bellwether in this conversation that will finally put this as a must, on the to-do list of the federal government?
I think so. I mean, I think it's one of those tipping point moments. It's, there's almost 40 million people in California. It's, if you talk to folks in China or India or wherever, like, they may not have heard of Colorado and what we did here, but everyone's heard of California. So I think people are saying, California did what? This is a big deal. And so I think those sort of reverberations are going to force the feds to take a hard look at this issue. I mean, we live in this weird system. There's duality where all these states are changing marijuana laws. The feds still have this sort of hard line, at least on paper, about where marijuana is and the harms thereof. And as Taylor sort of referenced, I mean, there's so many congressional members from California. They need to represent their constituents, and they'll be doing that in D.C., and hopefully we'll push for change.
And it's going to be interesting to see how some of those congressional leaders, but also the other politicians in the state end up being a very important part of this conversation moving forward. I mean, you have Gavin Newsom, the state's lieutenant governor, potentially the next governor of California, potentially the next president of the United States down the line, and he was a big supporter of this. So, I mean, plus you have Dana Rohrabacher, who is one of the few Republicans in Congress who really has been pushing for change. So do you think California is even going to grow in that manner of being a home base of these politicians who are pro-change, pro-legalization?
I think definitely. First of all, you're seeing that statewide politicians in California are recognizing that they have to be supportive of this issue. Kamala Harris, who ran for Senate and won in this election in California, was not originally a big supporter of cannabis issues, but when she started her campaign for Senate, she evolved on that. And I think it's clear that that's going to be the default position if you want to be a statewide elected official in California. And then the other thing that's going to be really important here is that the state of California is going to be putting pressure on Congress to act as well. If you are in an administration that is trying to regulate a multi-billion-dollar industry within your state, and the federal government is still preventing you from your businesses having access to banking, the federal government is still sucking away huge amounts of revenue in federal taxation, then it's in the interest of these statewide leaders to pressure Congress in conjunction with the work that the industry is doing.
Yeah,
sure.
And one interesting sort of, if you look at it from a sort of historical arc, I mean, we have to remember that medical marijuana began in California in 1996, 20 years ago, and then it, launched into now 29 other states, right? And so, legalization did not begin in California, but the fact that they adopted that this cycle, I think is just going to, again, be a mega big deal and influence other states, other countries, and the feds.
It is worth noting, Prop 215 turned exactly 20 years old last week. And then you also have House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi walking around saying, yeah, I'm voting yes on Proposition 64. And I'm sure that did not go unnoticed. Let's switch coasts, though, because, what about there being legal adult use marijuana on the East Coast for the very first time? This opens up an entirely new market for retail cannabis. But what else? Brian, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, Massachusetts coming on board was a really big deal. It was actually very similar to how Colorado, the campaign that we ran and were involved in here in 2012, where you had all the establishment against it and some significant money coming out against it. And really, just like in Colorado 4 years ago, the Massachusetts voters saw through the BS there and did what was right in spite of what politicians were telling them to do. So I think it's a very big deal. I mean, also Boston is a financial center for the country. And then it's interesting, I spent a lot of time out there, and there's a puritanical streak in Boston and Massachusetts. I mean, it's viewed as liberal in some ways, but then kind of uptight in others. And I think that the fact that voters, really resoundingly supported this, is a big deal, and will probably spread to other parts of the East Coast.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, here you had the Denver mayor, the Colorado governor against it. There you had the Massachusetts governor and the Boston mayor against it. But what are your thoughts about cannabis coming to the East Coast? And we're still waiting on the exact poll results from Maine, but it's looking like that could pass too. Taylor?
Sure. I think one of the things that's great about Massachusetts as kind of a symbol is that it isn't a state that fits the category that many of the other legalization states have. There's been this trend toward Western states that have, a heavy focus on direct democracy, a strong libertarian streak. And that has been where we've seen a lot of progress, but it also means that people have in some ways pigeonholed the idea that maybe these are the only states that are caring about doing something with adult use legalization. Massachusetts really flies in the face of that. It's a much more traditional state. You know, it's one of the original colonies. It is you know, an East Coast state. It doesn't have that same kind of image as the Western states do, and yet the voters there, in defiance of the establishment, very clearly chose a legalized, regulated path over prohibition.
You know, I think it did surprise a lot of people, and it was announced so quickly. Massachusetts, at least, was. We were talking right before the show, some of these ones that came out of the gate like, bam, like my next question. Arkansas, I think, took some folks by surprise. But did either of you guys think that you would live to see medical marijuana being implemented inside the heart of the Bible Belt in your lifetime? Taylor? Honestly,
it is surprising, but maybe not as surprising as you'd think. When you look at polls around medical marijuana, it now polls close to 90%. I mean, this is almost as close to a consensus issue as we get these days. And you don't get to 90% without some Bible Belters. You know, the fact is that people get that it doesn't make sense to deny beneficial treatments to patients who can benefit from them. That's not a hard argument to make anymore, even though we see people in the federal government continuing to try. I think the results in Arkansas and North Dakota, which also kind of came out of nowhere, you know, not a Bible Belt state, but still definitely a very conservative state, those are really indicators of how far we are now on medical marijuana, that it really has become almost a non-controversial issue.
And it's true. All 4 states voting on medical marijuana were decided in favor of medical marijuana, including Montana expanding its access and relaxing its rules up there. Brian, what are your thoughts about marijuana hitting the American South and the Bible Belt?
Yeah, and then Florida as well, right?
There you go, yeah.
A robust medical marijuana law this time around. So, you know, we're making headway down there, and you know, in large part, I think Sanjay Gupta. I think, you know, advocates like myself and Taylor sometimes have a hard time breaking into the South. They don't have the initiative process where we can put things on the ballot. It's tougher to get things going, but they do have TVs, right? And when Sanjay Gupta runs a special where he's, you know, kids are getting real benefits, stopping seizures from using marijuana or CBD or what have you, that hits people across the country. And we have seen just support, as Taylor said, for medical marijuana grow, and people get sick in Arkansas, and now they're going to have access to something that can help them.
That's a good point, yeah.
Can I add one other thing, too? I think when you're looking at Bible Belt states and plenty of states in the Rust Belt, too, the issue of the opioid epidemic has become so massive for people. I mean, this is truly a crisis that people are seeing in a daily way. And we see very real indications that access to medical marijuana can be a tool in fighting that. And people get that as well. You know, they see that the medicines that are being prescribed right now are often much more dangerous and much more damaging than medical marijuana would be. So why not have that as an option that people could use as an alternative?
And we are seeing those early identifiers. You know, multiple studies now showing that the regions and states with access to medical marijuana in this country have a lower rate of opioid abuse and opioid addiction. It's uncanny. It's startling. It's surprising to a lot of people. It's not surprising to a lot of people. You know, I've certainly been prescribed opioids after surgeries, and I realized very quickly that I want nothing to do with that. And I also have used medical marijuana for similar injuries, you know, and the difference is just unbelievable. So I think that's a big part of it, and I hope that we learn a lot more about that, and that there's some legit research to come in the years, so we have a better idea on where we're going with that as a treatment. But moving on up, stepping up to the federal level, we have a new president here in this country, president-elect. And what does a Donald J. Trump presidency mean for America's marijuana industry? Brian, let's start with you.
This is certainly a big moment, right? You know, what happened with the election was fascinating in that voters voted for change. You know, they voted for a new president, right? And then they also voted for marijuana reform overwhelmingly. So what exactly Donald Trump is going to do in the White House on this issue is a little tough to say. We can look at his sort of statements really over the last 20 years, but most recently on the campaign trail, and they've been a little all over the map. I mean, sometimes he says, we should legalize all drugs. Never mind, you know, I'm supportive of medical marijuana. And sometimes he kind of plays this law and order card and you know, indicates maybe things aren't going that well in Colorado. So it's a little tough to say exactly how it's going to land. I mean, I've been working a lot with my staff and trying to think about how we counsel people moving forward. You know, we work with a lot of folks that want to invest in this space, represent a lot of business owners, and I think this is a moment where we kind of need to keep our eye on two things. I mean, we really need to, I think, continue to encourage people to get into this industry, the right people to get in this industry, to invest money and grow, so we have that much more of a strong voice, and we have many more players. And if Trump and co were to turn the tables, where they'd have to mess with a lot of us instead of a small number. But then I think also I would not be surprised if Trump found a way to make an example of some people, right? And so I think it is more important than ever that our medical marijuana and marijuana businesses are 100% compliant with state law, are following local laws to a T, and are really doing everything right. So it's going to be an interesting time.
Taylor, where are you at on this issue? What does Trump mean for this still growing, blossoming industry that is absolutely flourishing, as we saw last night?
Well, as Brian said, there's a lot of uncertainty about exactly what direction Trump administration might take toward existing marijuana businesses and the programs, the state programs that have legalized them. I think there are a couple of opportunities here. One is there's an opportunity to continue to educate people at the federal level, both in Congress and in the new administration, about the realities of the cannabis industry, who these small business owners really are, how they are acting responsibly, what they are doing to contribute to their communities and the economy. It's very important, probably more important than ever, that we have a strong, united voice in D.C. to lay that groundwork, because I think part of the reason that there is uncertainty about what a Trump administration might do is that I think probably a Trump administration doesn't know what they're going to do. And it's really important that we be a part of influencing that. I also think that it's important that we continue to educate those folks about where the country is on this issue. And that's where the 2016 election is really important as a message to D.C. We had 16 million voters in 9 different states voting in favor of cannabis measures this election. In 7 of those 9 states, the cannabis measures outpolled or got more votes than Donald Trump did. So it's really important for these incoming leaders to understand that the country is behind these programs, and there really isn't an upside from a public safety and regulation standpoint or from a public opinion and political standpoint to try to turn back the clock here.
I'm glad you said that, because, not only do we have statistics like that, we look at Florida alone, going back to the 2014 midterms. Florida didn't pass that medical marijuana law, but more people voted for medical marijuana in that election than they did the guy who ended up winning the governor race that year. And then in Florida again this year, I read last night that more people voted for medical marijuana than did Donald Trump in the state of Florida.
That's right.
That's that is telling. Plus, we have these public surveys. I mean, how great is it that Gallup has been asking the same question, the exact same question, not changing the verbiage at all, about do you support marijuana legalization, since the 60s. And that's concrete data about us. It's about the American fabric that you can't deny. And I think making sure those leaders are aware of it is necessary. And I think it's a good point that you bring up too, because you are the NCIA, and NCIA lobbies Congress and lobbies D.C. on these issues.
They don't want to be too on the nose with my pitch, but it is. I do think the work that we're doing and other organizations are doing in D.C. is as important right now and in the next year as it's ever been.
Well, on that same subject, let's talk about these names. Chris Christie, Rudy Giuliani. Are these names perhaps more dangerous than the name Donald Trump when we're talking about, legalization in America. Taylor.
It's certainly a major reason to be concerned about a Trump administration. While Donald Trump has been sometimes supportive, sometimes not, sometimes falling in between on marijuana issues, Chris Christie has been pretty darn clear about where he stands, and it's not favorable to the industry.
Pretty darn clear, meaning explicitly blowhardy clear that he is not a fan of legalization.
What is not entirely clear yet is, what are the roles of these people going to be? This is where we have just entered into incredibly difficult territory to map, because we don't have a precedent for a President Trump. We just don't have a good sense yet of what a team around him is going to look like. We know that Christie and Giuliani have been very involved in his campaign and will almost certainly be very involved in his administration, but it's hard to say right now whether that alone is a reason to sort of pull the panic lever. I think it's going to be important to watch, and I think it's going to be important that we do make sure that we have our advocates, both our industry advocates, but also our advocates in Congress and in other political positions, prepared to make our case in order to balance that out.
And Brian, those names, Giuliani, Christie, do those names worry you?
They do worry me, but I would note, Chris Christie, I think many people in marijuana view him as sort of the Antichrist, but, if you look at New Jersey, they do have a medical marijuana law. It wasn't great. It's actually gotten better under Christie's reign.
Yeah, just expanded it a couple months ago.
Yeah, they just expanded, and he could have shut that down. Like he could have shut down their medical marijuana law. He shut down a bridge. He could do all sorts of things. But the broader point being, I think we do need to get involved and try to push for the right appointees. And I think at the end of the day, even Christie and Giuliani can probably read a poll, and when they see the American public overwhelmingly supported marijuana and supported Trump as well, for them, their first thing to do to come into office is sort of be like, let's shut down the will of the voters on this, but of course not on Trump, and I think it's a little tough to swallow, but, we need to keep a close eye on it.
Yeah.
It's also picking a fight with state governments, right? It's not just the businesses here in Colorado that are invested in this. The state legislature is, and the regulators are, and the governor, is much more supportive now than he's ever been. It's not a small thing for the DOJ to come in and trample on programs that have been voted on and set up by voters in the state and their representatives.
And similarly, even just 2 weeks ago, we saw opponents to legalization in multiple states, including Massachusetts and Arizona, using misinformation out of Colorado, to try and sway people to vote against legalization measures. And of course, Arizona did not pass this year. I was really proud that one of my colleagues stepped up and made some calls, and one of your guys' colleagues, Mason, rounded up some state legislators to write a letter to some of these campaigns saying, just use real data, because what you're using is completely fabricated. And so you're right. If you can get the attention of a Jonathan Singer, a really strong, well-respected state senator in Colorado, to write a letter and say, hey, you're actually spreading lies about the ills of marijuana legalization, then it is a different conversation. It's not about the businesses or the consumers. It's not about the stoners. It's about the legislators and the responsible members of the community, too.
I think this type of moment is exactly why we have been building a political advocacy movement around this industry from the beginning. You cannot be in the cannabis industry without also being in cannabis advocacy. And building that foundation, even though sometimes it seemed like small steps, especially at the federal level, that has been preparation for this moment, and it would have potentially been that moment regardless of which person had won the presidential election. It's preparation for the moment when we are transitioning, and we can't say for certain that the policies that the federal government has been sticking to will continue. And so we have to be organized and prepared and have our allies organized and prepared. And that's what all of this work has been about.
Yeah, and I mean, to sort of add to that, you know, our strength just doubled. You know, we went from 4 legalization states to 8, you know, overnight. We picked up, we now have 29, I think, medical marijuana states. Like, California alone adds an extra 39 million people that in legalized state. I mean, it's, you know, we have strong numbers. It's a matter of harnessing that and reminding the federal government that states have rights too, and that, you know, we should be allowed to sort of play this out in our states as we see fit. And in fact, you know, before this rebellion spreads too far, there should be a federal fix.
And I know you guys are in California regularly, throwing events with clients. I was just out there a lot last month. Producer Vince was out there with me. Our GM Brad was out there with me. You know, that is a passionate group of people. And granted, they're a bit, you know, I don't want to say rudderless, but they are finding their way, given that they are facing a regulated future, and it scares the hell out of a lot of them. But I think they are going to find a direction. And you're right, with harnessing that kind of power that only can be created by tens of millions of people. It's going to be fascinating to watch. But you know, earlier we heard from my colleague Alicia Wallace in the Quick Hit. She was interviewing public policy expert Mark Kleiman, or just earlier today, for a piece that we have on the site right now. And he told us that, quote, if the government wants to shut this down, meaning legalization, they can do it on a day's notice, end quote. So what's your take on that and the likelihood of that actually happening, Brian?
I don't think there's a very high likelihood of that happening. I mean, again, we've seen just the votes that keep coming, but the public clearly supports this. The federal government does have a lot of power in this space. I mean, they could send some letters and scare people. They could use, you know, law enforcement resources, I suppose, in certain ways to come after this. It's sort of questionable as to what their powers are, given some of the Hinchy-Rohrabacher, the Farr-Rohrabacher amendments and so forth, the restrictions on federal spending in the space. But, you know, it is certainly possible, right? You know, but we're living in a reality where, you know, I've been an advocate in this space for 12 years, and marijuana has always been illegal federally. It's always been illegal federally, you know, and we've always just fought that. And we've had many victories over the years, and last night was a mega victory. And I think we know we can't live our lives scared. We need to continue to push forward because we know we are on the right side of history. We know we're doing the right things for patients, for people that want to consume marijuana, for you know, adults who want to consume for whatever reason. We're protecting them, and we've created a robust industry in Colorado and beyond, and we need to work to protect that.
So Taylor, the Fed could stop in and shut this, but do you think they will?
It's hard for me to see how that serves anyone's interests, other than a few prohibitionists who are still holding on to those policies. The reality is, as Brian said, public opinion is completely against the idea of the feds coming in and shutting down programs that were created by voter initiative, that literally had the majority support of voters in order for them to be created at all. I don't see the political upside. I don't see the upside from a policy standpoint, because we're seeing that these programs are working the way that they're intended to. And I think it's not as simple as just coming in and raiding a bunch of businesses. These are businesses that have licenses with state governments. They have, you know, relationships there. And I think that it's going to be, that would create a tremendous outcry, much more than anything that you might compare to the raids from prior years before you know, these voter initiatives really took hold.
Sure. Brian, you're an attorney in the space. You mentioned 12 years of work in this space. The entire time it's been federally illegal. And we've talked before this about how you got into this. And you were that idealistic law school student or college student who really saw some of the social ills happening. Could you share that story briefly, just since that's kind of what we're talking about here?
Sure, yeah. I was sort of the generation that the war on drugs was sort of pushed down our throats. You know, DARE was taught in schools and, you know, regularly, and it always struck me as being sort of wrong-headed. And then, you know, as I was sort of in college and particularly in law school, I was fortunate enough to work for a federal judge and a professor that sort of encouraged my interest in dismantling the war on drugs and in analyzing the war on drugs, and particularly in the marijuana space. And you know, really was fortunate enough to get some stipend from the Marijuana Policy Project right my first day out of law school, and just started defending medical marijuana patients. And my law professors said it was career suicide, and that I should never, I should go to work for the district attorney or whatever the hell they wanted me to do. But it always felt good to me, and I was fortunate enough to hook up with, you know, the likes of Mason DeVert and Steve Fox and folks that have, you know, really been just seminal in this movement. And you know, the thing I was actually telling my staff this morning, as some people were sort of upset about the presidential vote, is like, you know, we were fighting this and we lost all our fights for years, you know, but we kept fighting, you know, we kept fighting, and we kind of need to channel, I think, that original spirit, you know, like we have some challenges ahead of us. You know, if Hillary would have won and legalization won in all these places, medicalization, it would be a pretty pretty easy road to federal change. Now I think we've got some challenges in front of us, and we need to remember how this sort of movement started. You know, it started as a social justice movement, as a right for patients to use medicine, and we fought the government and law enforcement every step of the way to get things done, but we got things done. And so I think we need to channel that spirit again and just sort of steel ourselves for the road ahead.
Well, speaking of that fight, all things considered, I want both of your opinion on this. Election 2016, thank God we were on the other side of it. You know, was this a net win or a net loss for the legalization movement? Taylor?
I think it's unquestionably a net win. Just purely on numbers, you're talking about 8 out of 9 states that passed it. But beyond that, you really are looking at a tipping point here. We now have more than 60% of the population of the U.S. living in a state that will have a regulated marijuana program, whether it's medical or adult use. You've got almost 25% of the country living in a state that will have adult use legalization. You, in an election that otherwise seemed to skew quite conservative, you saw these marijuana initiatives passing with substantial margins. I think also, you know, the initiative in Pueblo that you talked about earlier in the show is very important from a symbolic standpoint, in addition to it being extremely important to Pueblo's economy. This idea that there might be buyer's remorse was just completely rejected by that. You know, the prohibitionist movement was attempting sort of a test case there to see if they could convince people that legalization had been the wrong idea and they should roll it back. And instead, that was voted down by double digits. So I think what we're seeing here, regardless of the rest of the election, is that there is a mandate in this country now for marijuana policy reform, and it cannot be ignored. This election just cemented that, and that's why I see it as absolutely a net win.
A net win, and it's worth noting that Pueblo voted to keep its recreational businesses, and in the midterms 2 years ago, Manitou Springs, a much smaller community in Colorado, but again, some prohibitionists came in, challenged it, and they voted to keep their recreational community there. Brian, net win, net loss?
I think it's a net win for sure. I mean, all these states coming on board, particularly with California legalizing, Massachusetts legalizing, Florida, you know, such a populous state, bring on medical. And again, I think, you know, there's two big stories. One is Trump and one is marijuana. And you know, you look at those Trump voters. I mean, some of them are xenophobes, some of them are racist, but some of them aren't, right? Some of them are people that want change, and honestly, a lot of those people also voted for marijuana reform, you know. And so I think if you know, moving forward, we have to try to be positive. We have to try to clap, you know, sort of grab onto that and figure out how we can ride that wave forward, where marijuana laws continue to change, and ultimately prohibition is just a relic of the past.
You know, we saw this coming. Of course, the three of us, we knew that cannabis was going to be a significant issue last night, regardless of how these state initiatives went down. But it's exciting to be on the other side, and to see that this narrative is really continuing from 2014 with what we did here in Colorado and the midterms with Oregon and Alaska and excitement in DC, and now here we are. Wow. You know, we have more to talk about, including a very important pot quiz to get to. But first, I want to throw to our very own pollster of pot. And that is Professor Pat for this week's entry in the new Cannabist lexicon.
Ent. A slang term on Reddit and other sites for someone who smokes that's more discreet than saying, I am a marijuana smoker. It's based on the trees in Lord of the Rings that seem pretty stoned to anyone who watched the movie. Get it?
Thank you, Professor Pat. It is always educational. Nice spending some time with our pollster of pots. It is time for the pot quiz, you guys. A bit unusual episode, but we're still ending with a pot quiz because why wouldn't we? And I already did this, but I'm going to do this again. I apologize because this is a hard quiz. This is a very special election-themed quiz, but if there's anybody who can do well at this, it's the two of you. So let's jump in. Taylor, first question is yours. Brian, you've never done this before, so you can steal the point if she gets it incorrect, and vice versa. So, Taylor, North Dakota's successful medical cannabis measure is titled A, Proposition 205, B, Amendment 2, C, Statutory Measure 5, D, Question 1.
Oh, God.
And yes, there is a theme to this quiz.
Okay. All right. It's not 205. I know that.
I'll give you,
I shouldn't say which ones it's not.
Yeah, I
You
will
can
say.
steal it from me. Yeah.
Definitely don't say, oh, I know it's not that because that's X state.
Oh, my gosh.
Here it is real quick again.
Yep.
A, 205. B, Amendment 2. C, Statutory Measure 5. D, Question 1. And this is North Dakota.
North Dakota. I'm going with Statutory Measure 5.
Dang, nice work. Oh, man. Oh, Brian, she came ready.
Yeah, that's
All right.
That's powerful.
All right, Brian, you might see a theme developing here. Arizona's unsuccessful recreational measure is titled A, Question 4, B, Initiative 182, C, Amendment 2, D, Proposition 205.
I'm going to go D, 205.
Boom! All right, we got 1-1. We have a pot quiz on our hands, friends.
Nice.
Okay, you guys are fierce. Game face is on and everything.
I feel like my credibility is at stake here.
Taylor West.
I've never lost a pot quiz. This is my third one.
I know, that's
I've never
impressive.
lost.
All right, there's a lot at stake here. Brian, no charity, no throwing everything. This is 100% forward.
Oh, it's on.
Arkansas's successful medical marijuana measure is titled A, Question 1, B, Issue 6, C, Initiative 182, D, Question 2.
B, Issue 6.
Boom. Whoa.
I knew that
Confidence. Okay.
Nice.
And Brian, for the tie, Maine's likely successful recreational cannabis measure is titled A, Question 1, B, Amendment 2, C, Question 4, D, Initiative 182.
Okay,
I can go through them again one more time if you want, because there is a lot at stake here.
Yeah, hit me once more.
We're talking Maine. A, Question 1, B, Amendment 2, C, Question 4, D, Initiative 182.
Let's go A.
It is a tie! Brava again, you guys. Wow, props.
Well,
And it's a tie, it's not a loss.
Yeah,
That's right.
A lot of
Good
training
work.
is
yeah,
going on here. A lot of
absolutely.
training.
Yeah.
Oh man,
There's
you
no
guys,
double Jeopardy throwdown here?
no, we're not that prepared here at the Cannabis Show. Are you kidding me? I finished that quiz 5 minutes before you walked in the door.
I think it just goes to show that people out there can feel comfortable about the people they have representing them.
There you go.
As far as this industry goes.
We're paying attention.
We work well together,
Yeah.
There
There you go. Taylor West, National Cannabis Industry Group, Brian Vicente of Vicente Sederberg, LLC. I want to thank them. Very, very good guests, very good conversation today. Remember that our show today is generously underwritten by Bluebird Botanicals. They are a company that creates hemp-derived CBD oil and other herbal supplements. They sell that nationwide, worldwide. They ship worldwide too, so check them out, bluebirdbotanicals.com. But most importantly, thank you to you all for watching, for listening, for telling your parents about us, and for reading the Cannabist. I'm Ricardo. That's Vince. That's Don. Everybody have a great day. We'll see you next week. Man, you guys.
I choose to win. I'm all in. I'm calling any posse. You'll be raising at the end. I say it again. Ain't afraid to get in. I'll be going for the jackpot with aces in my hand. I'm raw.